The alley behind the Husk's luck end of Pentagram City stank of ozone and old blood, and Keck the sinner, a lesser thing, a mid-century embezzler with a possum's face and a debt he'd never crawl out from under, was exactly the wrong nobody to be standing there when the air went wrong. He'd been counting bottle caps. That was his life now. Caps, because the overlord who owned his marker liked to be paid in something humiliating, and possum-faced Keck had learned not to ask why. He was on his 93rd cap when the neon over the alley, that permanent bruise-red glow that passed for a sky down here, stuttered, browned out, and screamed. Not thunder, a high electric shriek, like every television in hell had been switched to the same dead channel at once. Then the ground gave up 3 bodies. They didn't fall so much as arrive, dumped out of nothing onto the wet pavement, tangled together and steaming. Keck dropped his caps. He'd seen new sinners land before. Everybody had. It was Tuesday, but new sinners came in confused and weeping and small. These 3 came in wrong, too solid, too finished. Like the rift had spat out something it wasn't built to carry and hadn't fully digested it on the way through. The big one stood first. He was blonde under the grime, square-jawed in a way that looked assembled rather than born, and he wore the ruin of a costume, a suit that had clearly meant something once, red and white and gold, a cape half torn away, a stylized eye stitched over the heart of it. His skin had already started to change the way all damned skin changed, a pallor going faintly gray, the beginnings of something reptilian creeping up the throat, 2 small pale horns pushing through the perfect hair like they were embarrassed to be there. He didn't seem to notice. He was looking at his own hands. "Okay," the big one said, and his voice was warm, and Keck's spine tried to climb out through his ears, because nothing that warm should sound that empty. "Okay, someone's going to explain this to me." He turned his gaze up at the red knot sky, and his eyes narrowed with the absolute confidence of a man about to solve a problem the way he solved every problem. Nothing happened. Keck watched the big one's face do something fascinating and terrible. The confidence held for a full second past the point it should have broken. Homelander, though Keck didn't know the name, wouldn't have understood it. The Vought logo over the heart meaning nothing in a city that had never heard of America. Homelander stared at the sky and willed the twin beams of heat that had defined every waking moment of his existence, that had been the truest fact of him, the thing that made him God, and produced 2 watering blue eyes and a headache. "Huh," he said. Behind him, the second one was up now, a woman, hair gone white-streaked and severe, an old cruelty sitting comfortable in her face. She rolled her shoulders like she expected to leave the pavement and rise. She didn't. She looked at her feet on the ground with the specific offense of someone who has never in living memory had to walk somewhere. "Was ist das?" she muttered. Then, catching herself, in flat American, "The hell is this?" The third was still down, lean, fast-built even at rest, a man whose whole body was an apology for stopping, and he was clutching his own chest, gasping, feeling for something in his ribs that wasn't answering. A-Train had died with a bad heart. He'd arrived with a worse one, and no compound V humming through it to paper over the damage. And for the first time since he was a teenager, the fastest man alive could not outrun the thing inside his own chest. "I can't," A-Train wheezed. "I can't feel it. The V. I can't feel the V, man. Where's the—" "It's gone," Stormfront said, still staring at her grounded feet. "It's all gone. Look at yourself." She held up a hand, and the fingers had gone the color of a drowned thing, claws pushing out where nails had been. "Look what they've made us." Homelander lowered his gaze from the sky at last. He looked at his hands again, flexed them, and there was a moment, Keck saw it, and would tell it wrong for 100 years in every dive bar he could talk his way into. A moment where the biggest thing in the alley understood, fully, that the fact of him was over. That he was, right now, weaker than the possum-faced nothing gaping at him from behind a dumpster. Homelander smiled. That was the wrong response, and Keck knew it was the wrong response the way you know a stove is hot before you've touched it. The smile was radiant, photogenic, built for a camera that wasn't there. "Okay," Homelander said, for the 3rd time, gentle as a lullaby. "New situation. We adapt." He turned that smile on Keck. "You, little guy, where are we?" Keck's mouth worked. What came out was, Hell. You're in hell. Pride ring. Pentagram City. A beat. You're dead. You're sinners now. Everybody down here's a sinner. Another beat. Because Keck could not help himself. Because self-preservation had never once been his strong suit. And that was frankly how he'd ended up down here in the first place. You want my advice? You find an overlord to owe before someone finds you. Unclaim's the worst thing to be. Homelander crouched down to Keck's level, easy, friendly, the cape pooling in the filth. Up close the horns were more obvious, and the teeth, when the smile widened, had started to point. Sinners, he repeated, tasting it. And who decides that? Who decided I'm the sinner? God? Keck offered. Homelander laughed, and it was a good laugh, an honest laugh, the first honest sound he'd made since arriving. God, he said. Sure. Yeah, let's meet him. They did not, in fact, meet God. What they met, 4 hours and one very confusing riot later, was a woman with the biggest voice and the smallest crowd in the history of hell. She'd found them because she found everyone, because her whole ridiculous, doomed, luminous project was built on finding exactly the people the rest of hell had written off. She came clattering up the boulevard in a coat too bright for the neighborhood, waving a leaflet, trailing a scowling gray-skinned girlfriend with a spear, and the flat expression of someone who had lost this argument many times, and would lose it many more. Hi. Hello. Oh my gosh, you three look like you're having a day. Charlie Morningstar skidded to a stop in front of the three strangers who had, in 4 hours, already terrified 2 loan sharks, and started a fistfight, and beamed at them like they were the best news she'd had all week. Are you new? You're new. Nobody's claimed you yet, right? That's okay. That's actually perfect, because I have a thing, and you might be exactly. Charlie. The gray girl, Vaggie, had her eye on Homelander and hadn't blinked. Look at them. Look at them. I am looking at them. They seem lovely. They don't seem lovely. He's smiling like Alastor. That, apparently, was a specific and damning comparison, because Charlie faltered for exactly half a second before the sun came back out. If you've made it this far into the dark with me, do the thing that keeps these open. Hit subscribe, and tell me in the comments which universe and which character you want dragged through a door like this next. Name both. Any world, any face. This one, 3 of the worst men television ever built, thrown into the one place that believes even they can be saved, was suggested by Hotfire Rose, and written by me. Now, back to the woman who's about to make the worst offer of her afterlife. Okay, so, hi, I'm Charlie, this is Vaggie, and this is the pitch. Charlie barreled on, thrusting the leaflet at Homelander, who took it with 2 fingers like it might be diseased. You're new. You've got nowhere to go. And in about, she glanced up at the red-ish weeks, the angels come down and kill as many of us as they can, because apparently that's a solution. But it's not. Because people can change, and I've got a hotel. And if you check in, and you work on yourself, you can be redeemed, and go up, and none of this has to be redeemed, Homelander said. Redeemed. He looked at the leaflet. Hazbin Hotel, it said, over a cartoon of a smiling building. Everyone deserves a second chance. He looked at Charlie, earnest, glowing, ferociously, stupidly hopeful. And something moved behind his eyes that Vaggie clocked and Charlie, God love her, entirely missed. Homelander had spent his whole life being told he was the greatest thing that had ever lived by people who were afraid of him. He had never once in that life met sincerity. He didn't have a category for it. And so he did what he always did with an input he couldn't parse. He decided it was a weakness, and he decided to use it. You know what, he said, and folded the leaflet with great care, and slipped it into what was left of his breast pocket, right over the stitched-in eye. Yeah, sign us up, all 3 of us. He put a heavy, warm hand on A-Train's shoulder. A-Train, still gray and gasping and terrified, flinched. We could really use a second chance, couldn't we, guys? We've done some things we're not proud of. Stormfront's mouth curled. So many things. So this is great. The smile again, wide as a highway. We'll get better. We'll be your, what's the word? Success stories. Yes? Charlie clasped her hands, incandescent, already not listening for the lie. Yes, exactly, that's Vaggie. They want to. Did you hear? I heard, Vaggie said, and did not lower the spear. High above them, in a black glass tower where 3 screens ran the same feed of the same alley, a monitor for a face leaned closer to the picture of the blond man with the pointing teeth and the eyes that had tried to burn the sky. Well, Vox said softly, to no one, to himself, to the delicious new shape of a monster who understood cameras. Hello. The Hazbin Hotel announced itself before you saw it, a smell of fresh paint that hadn't quite covered the older smell of something structural giving up, and then the building itself, lurching up out of the block like a wedding cake that had been left in the rain and refrosted by someone who refused to accept the situation. It was tall, red, absurd, and defiant. Every window had a curtain. Somebody had planted flowers by the door, and the flowers were doing their best in soil that wanted them dead. Homelander stopped on the pavement and looked up at it for a long moment, and Charlie, hovering at his elbow, mistook the look for wonder. I know, right? She said. It's a work in progress, but that's the whole point. We're all works in progress, and... It's very nice, Homelander said. It was not the word he was thinking. The word he was thinking was soft. Everything about this place was soft. The flowers, the curtains, the woman beaming beside him with her whole chest. The very idea of it. He had spent his life looking for softness in things, because softness was where the leverage lived, and he had never in his existence found a target this open, a whole building of it. He filed that away, and smiled up at the ridiculous facade like it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Behind him, Stormfront was doing her own arithmetic. She'd stopped rubbing her drowned gray hands together somewhere around the second block and started watching. The city, the sinners slinking past, the hierarchy written in who stepped off the pavement for whom. She had spent a very long human life and a longer soup one building movements, and a movement needed exactly 3 things: a grievance, an enemy, and a frightened crowd looking for someone to blame. Hell, she was realizing with something close to appetite, had all 3 in industrial quantities. She just needed her feet under her. She let Charlie herd her toward the door and said nothing, which was, for Stormfront, the most dangerous thing she did. A-Train said nothing either, because A-Train was concentrating on the stairs, 6 of them. He'd counted. He was a man who had run 100 meters in under a second on a bad day, and he stood at the bottom of 6 steps and did the math on whether his heart would make it to the top, and hated, with a purity that surprised him, every single person who wasn't afraid of a staircase. He climbed them one at a time, palm flat on the rail, and by the top he was gray and sheened with sweat and furious, and Charlie was holding the door for him with such uncomplicated kindness that he wanted to put his hand through her face. The lobby was worse. It was cozy. Okay. Charlie spun into the center of the room, arms wide. Everybody, we have guests. New guests, 3 of them. The lobby held a small and unpromising congregation. Behind the bar, a cat, gray fur, red wings folded tight, an expression of a man who had seen every bad idea hell could produce, and personally bartended most of them, did not look up from the glass he was drying. That was Husk. Beside the bar, perched on a stool with her legs kicked up, was a spider, pink and white, tall, several arms, a boa around the neck, an eye already running frankly up and down Homelander's ruined costume. That was Angel Dust. In the corner, a very small demon, with an enormous single eye and a duster held with both hands vibrated in place, watching the newcomers with an interest that was somehow more threatening than the cat's boredom. That was Nifty. And leaning against the far wall like a bad idea in a nice suit. New guests, said Alastor, and the room's temperature did something. His voice arrived with a faint crackle under it, an old radio hiss, as though he were being broadcast from somewhere a little to the left of where he stood. He was tall and thin and dressed in reds, a monocle, a permanent smile that had nothing to do with joy, and antlers that were, in certain lights, considerably more than antlers. How marvelous. Charlie, dear. You do find the most interesting strays. His grin and Homelander's grin met across the lobby, and for a moment, the 2 of them simply looked at each other, and the entire room felt the way a room feels when 2 predators clock a third fact simultaneously. This one's like me. Husk stopped drying the glass. Angel Dust's boa slid off one shoulder. Even Nifty went still. Hi, Homelander said, warm as ever. Big fan of the, he gestured vaguely at all of Alastor, whole thing you've got. Aren't you precious, said Alastor, delighted, meaning nothing kind by it. Charlie, who could feel a mood curdling and had built her entire personality around refusing to let moods curdle, clapped her hands. Great. Everybody's friends. Let's do the tour. So, rules. There aren't many. We do trust exercises. We do sharing circles. We keep a chart. She pointed proudly at a whiteboard on which someone had drawn a rainbow and the words Redemption Progress above a column of names, all of them at 0. And the big one. The only real rule is, you have to actually want to get better. That's it. That's the whole magic. You want it, you work it, you go up. She turned to the three of them, hope beaming off her like heat off asphalt. So do you want it? There was a silence. A-Train, still gray, still gasping, opened his mouth to say something. Later he wouldn't be sure what, something honest, something that came up out of the raw new fear of a body that could finally die. And Homelander spoke over him, smooth as glass. More than anything, Homelander said, we've done terrible things, Charlie, truly, and we're ready to face that, aren't we? He looked at the other two. It was not a question. So ready, said Stormfront, watching the room. Yeah, managed A-Train, and hated that even that felt like a lie, because down here wanting to live and wanting to be good had gotten tangled up in his chest, and he couldn't pull them apart. Charlie made a sound like a kettle achieving joy. Vaggie. Vaggie, they said yes, all three, on the first day. I heard, said Vaggie from the doorway, spear still in hand, eye still on Homelander. She had been an exorcist. She knew what a thing wearing a person's face looked like when it had decided you were prey. She was looking at three of them and one princess she would die for, and the math was making her sick. Angel Dust hopped down off his stool and sauntered over, all 6 foot plus of him, and looked Homelander up and down one more time with a connoisseur's frankness. So what'd you do, big boy? Up top? You got the whole, he flicked the torn cape, hero costume thing going on. Let me guess, cop? Something like that, Homelander said pleasantly. He was a hero, Stormfront said, and there was a thing in her voice, dry and knowing and cruel, that made even Angel Dust's grin flicker. The biggest hero in the whole world. Everybody loved him. They put his face on lunchboxes. Aw, said Angel Dust, uncertainly. That's sweet. It was very profitable, said Stormfront. Husk, from behind the bar, finally spoke. His voice was gravel, dragged over more gravel. Kid. He was talking to Charlie, but he was looking at Homelander. You ever notice how the ones who say yes fastest are the ones lying? Husk. Charlie's face crumpled. They just got here. We don't assume the worst. That's literally the opposite of the whole. I'm just saying what I see. Well, see something supportive. Homelander watched them squabble, the cynical cat, the desperate princess, and understood the room's fault lines completely, the way he'd once been able to read a boardroom or a crowd or a live network feed and know precisely where to push. Husk didn't believe him and never would. Irrelevant. Husk had no power here. Husk was owned. The spear girl hated him already. A problem, but a manageable one, because she loved the princess more than she trusted her instincts, and the princess would defend him. The princess herself was the whole game. Keep the princess believing, and the princess would spend her own credibility protecting him from everyone smart enough to be right. And the smiling man in red, Alastor, was the only genuine unknown. Because Alastor was smiling exactly the way Homelander was smiling, and Homelander had never once been in a room with someone doing the same trick he was doing, and he did not yet know if that made Alastor an ally, an obstacle, or a mirror he'd eventually have to break. I love it here, Homelander announced, to the room, to Charlie, to the little vibrating one-eyed demon who was now standing far too close to his boot and staring up at him with naked adoration. I think this is exactly what we needed. You're a bad boy, Nifty informed him, ecstatic, aren't you? And stabbed a cockroach on the floorboard without looking down. Sure am, said Homelander. Everyone, Charlie declared, spinning to the whiteboard and uncapping a marker with a flourish. Let's get you on the chart. She wrote, in big looping letters, 3 names as Homelander gave them. Flat, false, Easy. And drew 3 cheerful zeros beside them, and stood back, radiant, to admire the beginning of what she was certain was going to be the best redemption story the hotel had ever seen. Behind her, unseen, Homelander looked at his 3 zeros on the board and thought about how good it felt, how familiar, how warm, to be underestimated by someone who was going to hand you everything while they did it. Across the lobby, Alastor's grin widened by a fraction of an inch, because he had thought the same thing, and he had recognized the moment the thought crossed the blond man's face, and he was beginning to suspect this was going to be more entertaining than he'd had any right to hope. To new beginnings, Alastor purred, and produced, from nowhere, 4 glasses of something that steamed. Nobody drank them, but everybody understood that the game had started. Vox had built an empire out of the simple, filthy truth that people would rather be told what to think than do the work of thinking, and he had never once, in death or the long gray life before it, met a purer distillation of that truth than the footage now looping on all 3 of his faces. He'd pulled it off a security feed. Some overlord's flunky had a camera in that alley, and everything a camera saw eventually found its way to Vox. That was simply the physics of the city now. The clip was 90 seconds. A blonde man in a torn hero's costume lands in hell, tries to burn the sky, fails, understands in real time that he has become nothing, and smiles. Vox had watched it 400 times. He'd watched it slowed down, frozen on the exact frame where the confidence should have broken, and didn't. He had a connoisseur's eye for the moment a person's self-image outran their reality, because monetizing that gap was the whole of his business, and he had never seen the gap this wide or this load-bearing. Val. He didn't turn from the wall of himself. Vel, get in here. You need to see this. Valentino oozed in first, all coat and cigarette smoke and heavy-lidded contempt, 4 hands and a mood. If it's not somebody I can sell, Voxy, I gotta shoot. Watch. Velvet came in behind, thumbs already going on some device, not looking up. Is it the new Sinners? Everyone's posting the new Sinners. There's like a whole thing. They started a fight with 2 of Zestial's people on day 1. It's very messy. I've got a girl doing a reaction to it. Watch, Vox said again, and something in his voice, the flat electric certainty he only got when he'd found something genuinely worth wanting, made even Valentino look up. The clip played. The blond man tried to burn the sky, failed, smiled. Silence in the black glass room. Velvet's thumbs had stopped. Okay, she admitted. That's a face. That's not a face, Vox said. That's a product. Look at the jaw. Look at the cape. He was somebody up top, a hero, the feed says, an actual televised hero. They built a whole media apparatus around him, and he just found out he's got no powers, no money, no network, no audience, and he's in hell, and his very first instinct, his reflex, before he even thinks about it, is to perform confidence at a camera he doesn't know is there. Vox drifted closer to his own wall, screens flickering with something that might have been hunger. You know how long it takes me to train a face to do that? To smile through the worst moment of their afterlife because the smile's worth more than the truth? I can't train that. You're born with that. Or you're remade with it. He tapped a claw against the glass, over the frozen grin. He's me, Val. Before the deals. Before the leverage. He's raw. And he just checked himself into a hotel run by a girl who thinks she can hug it out of him. Valentino exhaled smoke through his teeth, watching the loop with new interest. So he's yours. Sign him. What do you want from us? A vote? I want, Vox said slowly, to not screw this up by moving too fast. He finally turned from the wall, all 3 faces settling into one focused expression. Because here's the thing that's bugging me. Watch his eyes at the end. Not the smile. The eyes. He froze the frame. He's not scared. Everybody's scared on day 1. He's not even angry. He's taking inventory. He's already worked out that the powers were never the point, that the point was always the fear and the image and getting people to hand you things. And you can do all of that down here with 0 compound V. He let that land. I don't want to recruit a guy like that. Recruiting him makes him think I need him. I want him to come to me. I want him to spend a week in that hopeless little hug factory, realizing exactly what hell rewards, and figure out on his own that there's only one person in this city who's already built the machine he's looking for. He smiled, and every screen in the tower smiled with him. And then, he walks in that door thinking it was his idea. That's a lot of patience, Velvet observed. For you. It's not patience, Vox said. It's a hook already in the fish. Just gotta let him run. At the hotel, Homelander was proving Vox right, faster than Vox could have hoped. It had taken him 3 days to run the experiment, and he'd run it the way he ran everything, quietly, with deniability, watching the numbers. The question was simple. Without the lasers, without the flight, without the strength, am I still me? And him being him had always, underneath the powers, been about one thing, getting other people to be afraid of him, and grateful for him at the same time, so that the fear could never quite organize itself into anything that might stop him. So he tested it. On angel dust first, because angel dust was easy. A few well-placed compliments, a few gentler than expected moments, a performance of a wounded man trying to be good, and the spider, who deflected everything with a joke, precisely because so few people had ever bothered to aim kindness at him without wanting something, softened by half a degree. Not trust, but an opening. Homelander noted it. Kindness is a lever here too. Good. On Husk it didn't work, which he'd expected, so he adjusted. He stopped performing at Husk and started simply making sure Husk saw him being pleasant to everyone else, so that Husk's warnings would sound, over time, like the paranoia of a bitter drunk. He noted that, too. Isolate the one who sees you by making his seeing look like a flaw. And on the sinners of the neighborhood, the real test, he learned the thing that would organize the rest of his afterlife. He'd gone out under the cover of one of Charlie's community outreach mornings, handing leaflets on a corner, all wholesome, and a sinner had shoved him. A big one, tusked, twice his mortal strength now that Homelander had no strength at all, and the old Homelander would have burned him to ash without breaking eye contact. This Homelander couldn't, so he did the other thing, the thing from before the powers were the point. He didn't flinch. He smiled into the tusked face, stepped in closer instead of back, and said, softly, warmly, with total serene certainty, "You don't want to do that. You really, really don't." And he held the eye contact, and he believed it, radiantly, the way he'd believed he could burn the sky. And the tusked sinner, who had every physical advantage and no idea why his own hindbrain had started screaming, backed off. It worked. Fear didn't come from the lasers. Fear came from the certainty. It always had. The lasers had just been how he'd gotten lazy about it. He walked back to the hotel that morning, genuinely happy, in the way he was only ever happy when a variable resolved in his favor, and he found Charlie waiting on the steps with her marker and her hope, wanting to know how outreach had gone. Amazing, he told her, and meant a completely different thing than she heard. I really connected with someone today. Felt like I made an impact. Charlie drew a little upward-pointing arrow beside his name on the chart, the first movement any name had ever gotten, and nearly cried. Vaggie, watching from the doorway, wrote something else down in a notebook she'd started keeping, which was a list, growing daily, of every person Homelander had spoken to and how they'd changed after. She wasn't an exorcist anymore, but she still knew how to build a threat assessment, and she was building one, and every day it got longer, and every day Charlie loved him a little more. Stormfront, meanwhile, had found the radio, not Alastor, the actual medium. Hell had 100 pirate broadcasts, sinner-run channels screaming into the neon, and most were noise, but she'd sat with Husk's old set for 2 nights learning the frequencies, learning who listened, learning the grievances, and there were so many, sinners furious at the exterminations, sinners who hated the overlords, sinners who hated heaven, hated the hierarchy, hated that a damned soul from the wrong century got stepped on by a damned soul from the right one, a whole ring full of resentment with no shape to it. She didn't need her powers to shape resentment. She'd never used her powers for that. Her powers had been for the finish, the part where the crowd she'd already built got to watch her win. The building had always been done with a microphone and a smile and a simple, endlessly repeatable lie. They did this to you, and I am the only one who will say so out loud. She started small, a few words to the sinners in the outreach line, a few more at the bar, a phrase, planted and repeated. The hotel isn't the answer. The hotel is a leash. She watched it travel. By the fourth day, she heard it come back to her from a sinner who thought he'd thought of it himself, and she felt the old, obscene warmth of a movement taking its first breath, and she smiled her drowned gray smile and thought, I don't need the flight. I never needed the flight. I need a frightened crowd and a door to point at, and hell has given me an infinite supply of both. Only A-Train was not thriving. A-Train sat in the hotel's little group therapy circle every afternoon because Charlie made them, and he sat there with a body that could finally die and a heart that stuttered on 6 stairs, and he listened to angel dust talk, haltingly, about Valentino, about being owned, about the particular grief of surviving something that everyone treats as a joke, and A-Train, to his own horror, understood it. He had spent his whole life being the product, being disposable, being the fast black man Vought slotted in and out of the 7 when the optics required, and he had never once let himself feel the shape of that, until he was dead and gray and mortal in a circle of demons, and one of them was saying it out loud. He didn't say anything back. He didn't know how, but he stopped smirking, and Charlie, who missed almost everything, did not miss that, and when she drew that day's arrows on the chart, A-Trains went up too, and for once, unlike Homelander's, it was real. Which meant that of the 3 monsters she'd checked in on Faith, the hotel was, without anyone quite noticing yet, actually reaching one of them. The question the whole story would come to turn on was whether that would be allowed to matter, or whether the other 2 would burn it out of him before it could. Alastor did not, as a rule, involve himself in Charlie's strays. They came, they wept, they failed. They were exterminated or they slunk off to be some overlord's problem, and none of it touched the enormous private machinery of his own amusement. He stayed at the hotel for reasons that were his, and stayed out of its guests' little arcs for the same reason a chef doesn't eat off the customers' plates. The blonde man was the exception, and Alastor had spent 4 days deciding why, and he had finally landed on it, and the answer displeased him, in a way that made it fascinating. The blonde man was doing Alastor's own act, and doing it sincerely. That was the thing. Alastor's grin, his warmth, his theatrical delight in everyone around him, all of it was a performance, a beautiful lacquered surface over a cold engine that found the whole of existence a passing entertainment. He knew it was a performance. That was the joy of it. The gap between the smiling host and the thing underneath was where Alastor lived. But the blonde man, Homelander, the sinners were calling him now, a ridiculous name. The blonde man smiled the exact same smile, and there was nothing underneath it. No cold engine, no private self, laughing. The performance went all the way down. Homelander wasn't wearing a mask over a monster. Homelander was a monster who had been built as a mask, with nothing behind the mask but the desperate, bottomless need for the mask to be believed. It was, Alastor thought, watching him across the lobby charm a table of the hotel's few sinner guests, like meeting a phonograph that thought it was a musician. He decided to conduct an experiment of his own. He found Homelander alone on the hotel's back landing on the 5th night, the neon of the city painting them both in bruise light, and he arrived the way he always arrived, which was to already be there when you turned around. "You've made quite the impression," Alastor said. His voice carried its little undertow of static, an old broadcast bleeding through. "The sinners are afraid of you, genuinely, and you haven't so much as raised your voice." The grin sharpened. "However did you manage that, with no power to speak of?" "I don't need power to be believed," Homelander said. Easy, warm, but his eyes had gone flat and evaluating, because he'd been waiting for this conversation with the smiling man for 5 days, and here it was. People decide what you are in the first 3 seconds. After that, they just look for reasons to keep being right. The trick's giving them the reasons. "Marvelous," Alastor breathed, and meant it, because it was almost verbatim his own philosophy, arrived at by a creature who'd clearly never had a philosophy in his life, only an appetite. "You know, I think you and I are going to be great friends." "I don't have friends," Homelander said pleasantly. "I have people who are useful, and people who aren't yet." Alastor laughed, delighted, a real crackle of static in it. "Oh, I know." And here Alastor did the thing he'd come to do, the thing the iron law of this whole doomed city warns, is the best and most dangerous move on the board, and the thing Alastor, being Alastor, could never quite resist. He offered a deal. He did it lightly, the way he did everything. A conjurer's flourish and a hand extended. Green light already curling at his fingertips like smoke that had opinions. "You want power back," Alastor said. "Of course you do. And I happen to have a great deal of it. More than this city credits me with. I could give you a taste. Enough to make those lasers of yours crackle again. All I'd ask in return is the usual trifle." The green light pulsed. "Your soul, signed over. A handshake, and you're mine. But you're powerful and mine, which is so much better than powerless and free, don't you find?" Homelander looked at the extended hand, looked at the green light, and Alastor, who had made this offer 1,000 times, to overlords and sinners and desperate fools, and read the flicker of temptation in every single one of them, watched for the flicker. It didn't come, because Homelander had spent his entire existence owned. Vought had made him in a lab, raised him in a white room, scripted his words, chosen his enemies, decided when he flew and when he smiled, and whom he was allowed to love, and the single organizing terror of his whole life, deeper than the need to be adored, underneath even that, was the certainty that he would rather burn the world to ash than ever belong to anyone again. He had killed to stop belonging to people. He had killed the man who made him, and now a smiling demon was offering him power in exchange for a leash, and Homelander felt something he had not felt since the sky wouldn't burn. He felt, briefly, completely safe, because for once he understood the game perfectly and knew he had already won it. "No," Homelander said. Alastor's grin held, but his eyes changed. "No. You think I don't know what you are." Homelander stepped in, closer, the way he'd learned to, into the space where the tusked sinner had backed off. Except Alastor did not back off, and both of them noted that, and both of them filed it. "You want to own me. Give me a little power on a string so I spend the rest of forever being grateful and afraid, checking in. Kept. I've had owners. I ate the last one. The smile again, radiant, empty, all the way down. I'll get my power back. But I'll get it because I took it, and it'll be mine, and no one will ever get to hand it to me again." He let that sit. "So no, keep your green light, but it's real sweet of you to offer. And here is the beat the city is built to deliver." And it delivered. The deal backfired. Not with fire, with information. Alastor had made his offer to open the man up, to find the appetite he could hook, and instead, the offer had shown Homelander exactly where Alastor's power came from, that it was a thing that could be given, which meant it was a thing that had been gotten, which meant it had a source, which meant the terrifying radio demon was, underneath the theater, a man on a leash of his own, holding out the very leash he wore. Homelander had come to hell knowing nothing. He walked off that landing knowing the most important thing there was to know about the most dangerous creature in the building. Even he owes somebody. Alastor stood alone on the landing for a long moment after the blonde man had gone, his grin fixed, his static gone very quiet, and for the first time in a long time, the radio demon was not entertained. He was unsettled. He had reached out to hook a monster, and the monster had declined to be hooked, and worse, had looked at the hook itself and understood the hand that held it. Alastor did not like being understood. It was, he reflected, going to be necessary to keep a very close eye on this one. Not to own him. He plainly couldn't be owned. The contract would find no purchase, would very likely backfire, exactly as the offer just had. But to watch him, and, if it came to it, to be the one holding the angelic steel when someone finally decided the blonde phonograph had played long enough. 2 rings of glass and neon away, Vox watched a different feed and drew the opposite conclusion, and that difference would decide everything. He'd had a lip reader on the landing footage within the hour. He knew Alastor had offered the deal. He knew Homelander had refused it. And where Alastor came away unsettled, Vox came away elated, because Vox had just watched his read get confirmed in the most expensive way possible. The blonde man had turned down free power rather than be owned. "That's it," Vox said softly, to his wall of himself. "That's the whole key to him. He doesn't want power. He wants power nobody gave him. He wants to earn it, so it's his." He laughed, screens flickering. Alastor tried to buy him. Amateur. You don't buy a guy like that. You build him a ladder and let him think he found it. He was already sketching it, The plan that would bring Homelander to his door thinking it was his own idea. A platform. An audience. Not power handed over, never that. But power taken. In front of a crowd. With Vox's cameras just happening to be there to make it real. Because that was the thing the Hug Factory and the Radio Demon both misunderstood about fame, and Vox never had. You didn't need to give a man like this anything. You just needed to give him a stage, and stand back, and broadcast. Val, he called. Change of plan. I don't want to sign him. Valentino, from the couch. You just spent a week telling us. I know what I said. I don't want to sign him. I want to make him. Vox turned, and every face was grinning now. I want to put a camera in that hotel. And in the hotel, unaware of the two overlords now shaping their afterlives from opposite directions, Charlie Morningstar stood in front of her chart late that night, alone, and looked at the little upward arrows, 3 of them today. Homelanders, because he'd told her, warmly, that he'd resisted a temptation. A trains, because he'd stayed in the circle and, for the first time, spoken. And a third she'd added on faith next to Stormfront's name, because Stormfront had smiled at her that afternoon, and Charlie could not conceive of a smile that wasn't a door opening. She capped the marker and looked at the arrows and let herself, for one private moment, believe it was working. Believe that even these 3, the ones Vaggy's notebook was filling up with warnings about, the ones Husk wouldn't turn his back on, even they could be reached, if she just loved them stubbornly enough, longer than they could hold out. She was right about exactly one of them. The tragedy the whole story was building toward was that she would never find out which, because the other 2 were going to make certain the one who could be saved never got the chance. The thing about a movement is that it never looks like a movement until the day it suddenly does, and by then it is far too late to have stopped it when it was small. Stormfront had been small for 8 days. 8 days of frequencies and phrases, of leaning close to a sinner in the outreach line, and murmuring the thing they already half believed until they believed it loudly, of letting the hotel as a leash travel the neighborhood on its own legs. She had done this before. In 100 human years and a soup century after, she had done this so many times it was less a strategy than a reflex, and the mechanics never changed. You did not tell a frightened crowd what to think. You found what they already resented, gave it a name and an enemy, and let them believe the rage had been theirs all along. The genius was never in the message. The genius was in disappearing, so that the crowd carried the fire, and you were merely the one who happened to be standing near the warmth when it caught. On the 9th day, it caught. There was a rally. Not called by her, that was the point. That was the whole art. It was called by a tusked sinner and a 3-eyed woman, and a dozen others who each thought they'd woken up angry on their own. In a lot 3 blocks from the hotel, under the perpetual red, a couple hundred damned souls with grievances that finally had a shape. And the shape was this. Heaven kills us and calls it math. The overlords own us and call it order. And now there's a hotel, promising the only way up is to grovel and change and become the kind of soul heaven might deign not to murder next year. It's a leash. It's the nicest leash in hell, and a leash held in a soft hand is still a leash. It was, Stormfront reflected from the back of the crowd where she'd made sure to stand, completely true. That was what made it work. She had never in her existence needed to lie about the problem. She only ever lied about the solution, and the solution, as always, as inevitably, was going to turn out to be her. She let the tusked sinner talk himself hoarse. She let the crowd's fury build with no outlet, because a crowd with no outlet will manufacture one, and a manufactured outlet needs a leader, and a leader who arrives to a movement already burning is a savior, where a leader who starts one is just another loudmouth. She waited until the exact moment the anger curdled toward directionless violence, and then she stepped up onto a crate, drowned gray and severe and certain, and she did not shout. She spoke quietly, so they had to lean in. They told you, Stormfront said, that you have to change to be worth saving. A pause, she let it hang. I'm not going to tell you to change. I think you're fine. I think you were always fine. I think somebody up there decided you weren't, and somebody down here agreed, and every single day of your afterlife has been built on the two of them agreeing about you over your head. Another pause. The crowd was silent now. Hundreds of damned faces turned up to her. You don't need a hotel. You don't need to grovel your way into a heaven that murders you for fun. You need to stop asking. And then, softly, the hook. The same hook it had always been. In every century, in every tongue. They did this to you. And I am the only one down here willing to say it to your faces. The roar that went up was not a sound of joy. It was the sound of a couple hundred people who had been told for the first time by someone with the nerve to say it out loud, that their rage was correct. It is the most addictive sound in any world. Stormfront closed her eyes and let it wash over her drowned gray skin, and she was, for that moment, more powerful than she had ever been with the flight and the lightning, because those had only ever let her win a fight, and this let her own the fights other people were willing to have. Velvet's cameras caught all of it. By nightfall, a clip of the quiet gray woman on the crate had 6 million views across the Vees feeds, captioned by some intern, "New sinner goes off," and Vox watched it and revised his estimate of the situation upward, because he'd been so busy building a ladder for the blonde one that he'd nearly missed that the white-haired one had built her own audience from nothing in 9 days flat. 2 of them, he murmured. 2 products in 1 hotel. Vel, are you seeing? Everyone's seeing, Velvet said. She's trending over the extermination countdown. People are making her into a sound. The rally reached the hotel the way bad news always reaches a home, through the front door, in the mouth of someone who loved you. Angel Dust had been at it, not as a believer. Angel Dust believed in very little, which was its own kind of armor. But because a couple hundred angry sinners in a lot was, historically, a decent place to score, and he'd gone for the reasons Angel Dust went anywhere. He came back to the hotel quiet, which was unlike him, and he found Charlie at the chart, and he told her what he'd seen. The gray lady, the crate. They did this to you. The roar. Charlie, he said, and for once there was no joke in front of it. Toots, I've seen a lot of loud in this city. That wasn't loud. That was organized. She's running a thing, and she's running it against you. Charlie's face did the thing Vaggie had learned to dread, the small crumple before the bright rebuild. She's a guest, Charlie said. She's on the chart. She went up. Angel, I gave her an arrow. She smiled at me. Yeah, said Angel Dust gently. I know. And now the hotel split, along the exact fault lines Homelander had mapped in the lobby on day 1. And the argument that broke out was the argument the whole story had been quietly loading since the moment 3 monsters agreed too fast to be saved. Vaggie went first, because Vaggie had been waiting 8 days for permission. I told you, she had the notebook out, the threat assessment, pages of it now, all 3 of them, day 1. I told you they were lying and you drew them arrows. Charlie, that woman is building an army against the one thing you've ever cared about. And the blonde one has half the neighborhood scared of him without lifting a finger. And the fast one, she faltered, because the fast one complicated her case. Okay, the fast one maybe, but the other 2 are using this place. Using you. And every day you defend them, you spend the credibility. That's the only thing protecting the sinners who are actually trying. People can change, Charlie said, and it came out smaller than she wanted. Some people, said Husk from the bar, not unkindly. Kid. That's the part you never want to hear. Some people, not all. And the ones who can't, the ones who are just built wrong, they figure out real fast that a place that assumes everybody can be saved is the easiest place in hell to hide, 'cause you'll defend them on principle, right up until they've got what they came for. He drained his glass. That gray lady ain't looking for redemption. She found something she likes better. And your boy in the cape never wanted it in the first place. You don't know that. I know his type, Husk said. I was an overlord, remember. I owned souls. I know what a guy looks like when he's already decided he's the exception to every rule in the room. Your boys decided it about God. And here A-Train, who had been sitting in the corner of the lobby saying nothing, who had come further in 8 days than anyone on the chart, including the ones with fake arrows, stood up. He's right, A-Train said. The room turned. A-Train's heart was hammering. It always was now. That was the new fact of him. But he made himself say it, because 8 days of Angel Dust, talking about being owned, had cracked something open in him that he couldn't close again. and didn't want to. Homelander's not gonna change. Stormfront's not gonna change. I know them. I ran with them. I watched Homelander. He stopped, started again. Up top. I watched him do things you people don't have a word for, and he did 'em smiling, and everybody clapped. He's not lying to you 'cause he's evil, Charlie. He's lying to you 'cause he genuinely does not believe there's anything to fix. He thinks he's perfect. He thinks this. He gestured at the hotel, the chart, the flowers dying bravely by the door, is a thing that happened to him, not something he earned. You can't redeem a guy who doesn't think he did anything. His voice cracked. I know, 'cause I spent my whole life being that guy. And I only stopped 'cause I died, and got dumped down here with no powers, and no money, and nobody clapping, and I finally had to just sit with it, what I was. The lobby was very quiet. But you did, Charlie said softly, and there were tears standing in her eyes, and for once they were the right tears. You did sit with it. A-Train. That's the whole thing. That's the entire thing I've been trying to say. You prove it can happen. Yeah, A-Train said. And that's why they can't let me. He said it flat, and it landed flat. And it was the truest thing said in the hotel that day. And everyone in the room understood it at once. Because if the fast one changed, if the fast one actually got saved, then Homelander's whole story about himself broke. If redemption was real and A-Train could reach it, then Homelander not reaching it wasn't hell being unfair. It was a choice. It was Homelander choosing the throne over the door, every day, on purpose. And Homelander could survive being feared, and being hated, and being hunted. He could not survive being a man who chose this, while a lesser man beside him chose better. So what do we do? Vaggie said into the silence. And it was the first time she'd said we. The first time she'd asked Charlie a strategy question instead of losing an argument, and Charlie heard it, and it was almost worth the whole terrible day. Nobody had an answer. Upstairs, unseen, a small red light blinked once behind the grill of a hotel radio that had not, until 3 days ago, been able to receive. Vox's camera was already inside, and it had recorded every word A-Train just said. Vox did not sit on the footage. Vox never sat on footage. Footage was currency, and currency left in a drawer was an insult to the whole idea of money. But he was careful about how he spent it, because Vox understood a thing about leverage that the cruder overlords never did. Information delivered to the wrong person at the right moment was worth 10 times its face value, and the art was entirely in the aim. He had a clip of the fast one saying, in a hotel lobby, to a room of witnesses, "That's why they can't let me." A clip that laid out, in the fast one's own mouth, the exact fracture line running through the three of them. And Vox had a choice about where to point it. He could send it to Charlie and break her heart and gain nothing. He could broadcast it and burn a story that was worth far more slow-cooked. Or he could deliver it, quietly, to the one man in hell for whom it was not information at all but a provocation. A man who needed only to be shown the fracture to widen it himself, at no cost to Vox, and with every bit of the resulting spectacle captured on the very cameras that had started it. He delivered it to Homelander. He did it with a craftsman's care. No overt contact. That would have read as recruitment, and recruitment was the one move Homelander was built to refuse. Instead, on the 11th night, the hotel radio in Homelander's room clicked on by itself, low, and played him the clip. Just the clip, A-Train's voice in the dark. He's not lying to you 'cause he's evil. He's lying 'cause he genuinely does not believe there's anything to fix. That's why they can't let me. Then static. Then a voice, smooth, electric, unhurried, saying only, "Thought you should hear how your friend talks about you when you're not in the room." No charge. A well-wisher who admires your work. Then nothing. Homelander sat on the edge of the bed in the bruise-red dark for a long time. He was not, whatever the sinners of the neighborhood had decided, a stupid man. He knew he was being played. He knew the clip had been handed to him by someone who wanted him to do something with it, and he had spent his whole life refusing to be anyone's instrument. And the correct move, the strong move, was to do nothing, to let A-Train's betrayal sit unaddressed, to deny the smooth voice its spectacle. He knew all of that, and it didn't matter, because the clip had reached the one place in Homelander that no strategy could govern. That's why they can't let me. A-Train thought he was better. A-Train, the disposable one, the one Vought had shuffled in and out of the Seven like a spare part, the one who'd spent the whole mortal life afraid. A-Train had stood in a lobby and told a room full of demons that Homelander wasn't feared because he was strong, or hated because he was cruel, but lying, out of a broken conviction that he was perfect. A-Train had looked at him and seen not a god but a wound, and worse, immeasurably worse. A-Train had gone and gotten better, had sat with what he was and reached for the door, which meant A-Train was standing in the hotel every day as living, breathing, gray-faced proof that the door existed, and Homelander was choosing not to walk through it. Homelander could survive anything except that. Because if the door was real, then everything he was, the fear, the throne he was already building out of certainty and nerve, the whole magnificent project of his afterlife, wasn't destiny. It was a choice, and a choice could be judged, and Homelander had murdered his way across two worlds, precisely so that no one would ever again get to judge him. So the choice hell had built for him, the one the whole city had been maneuvering him toward from the moment he landed powerless in that alley, arrived not as Alastor's green light or Vox's ladder, but as the oldest and simplest fork there was. The man beside you is becoming better than you. Do you rise to meet him, or do you drag him back down? Charlie's whole hotel was the argument that a soul, offered that fork, could choose to rise. Homelander sat in the dark and chose to drag. Not with violence. He was cleverer than that, and violence would have cost him Charlie's protection, which he still needed. He chose the thing he'd always been best at, the thing that needed no powers at all. He chose to poison the proof, to get to A-Train and find the crack in the redemption and widen it, and make the fast one his again, not because he needed A-Train, but because he could not permit A-Train to be evidence. He found him the next morning, in the hotel's little kitchen, alone. And here is where the story could have broken either way, and where Charlie's entire faith was, unknowingly, put to its truest test. Because A-Train, gray and mortal and 11 days into being a different man, looked up from the counter and saw Homelander in the doorway, and knew, the way you know weather, exactly what had walked in. "You heard," A-Train said. "I heard." Homelander smiled, warm, terrible, and came into the kitchen slow, and the kitchen felt suddenly very small. "That's some speech you gave. That's why they can't let me." He shook his head, fond, wounded. "You always did talk too much, man. It's why Vought never trusted you with the big stuff." "Don't." A-Train's heart was going. He could feel it. The bad rhythm. The thing that could finally kill him. "Don't do the thing. The voice. I know the voice. I watched you do it to Congressman. It doesn't work on me anymore, 'cause I got nothing left you can take. I'm already dead. I already lost the powers, the money, all of it. There's nothing you can threaten me with." "I'm not threatening you," Homelander said, hurt, so gently, drifting closer. "I'm worried about you. This place is getting in your head. All this feeling stuff. This girl telling you you're broken and need fixing. That's not you, A-Train. You were fast. You were the best. And now you're in here every afternoon crying in a circle with a spider, letting them convince you you're something to be ashamed of. Closer. The warmth turning. The way it always turned. From bomb to blade without changing temperature. I'm the only one down here who remembers what you actually were. Everybody else just sees a gray little sinner on some hotel's chart. I see A-Train. Come with me. We're gonna get our power back. Real power. Taken. Ours. And you can be somebody again, instead of somebody's redemption project." And it was good. It was so good. It was aimed with a lifetime of precision at the exact soft place. The fear of being nobody, the grief of being disposable, the old dream of being fast and adored. And if A-Train had been the man who died, it would have worked. But A-Train had spent 11 days sitting with what he was, in a circle, with a spider who talked about being owned, and he had learned the one thing that made him immune to the only voice that had ever governed him. "See, that's the thing," A-Train said quietly. His hands were shaking. He let them shake. "You just told me who I were. Past tense, fast, the best, adored. And you think that's the good part." He swallowed. "Man, I hated it. Every second of it. I was fast and scared, and disposable. And I smiled through all of it, 'cause that's what you do. and I never once let myself feel how much I hated it, 'cause feeling it would have meant I couldn't keep doing it. He looked up, and his eyes were wet and steady. Down here, I finally stopped running long enough to feel it, and you know what? Being nobody on some hotel's chart, crying in a circle with a spider who actually gets it. That's the first time I ever felt like a person instead of a product. You can't offer me something better than that. You don't even know what it is. The kitchen was silent. The bad heart hammered, and Homelander stopped smiling. Not in rage, that came later. In something rarer and, for the half second it lasted, almost human, incomprehension. Because A-Train had just described a thing Homelander had no category for. The same thing Charlie had glowed with in the alley on day one. The thing that lived under Angel Dust's jokes and behind Vaggy's spear. The possibility that being small and honest and reached was worth more than being adored. Homelander looked at it the way a colorblind man looks at a painting everyone else is weeping over, and knew, with a cold that went all the way down, that he would never see it, and that the not seeing was the whole reason he was in hell. For 1/2 of 1 second, standing in a hotel kitchen, the most powerful ego two worlds had ever produced, came within a breath of the only genuine self-knowledge it would ever be offered. Then he decided it was a weakness in A-Train. "Okay," Homelander said, and the warmth was gone, and what was under it was just the flat, empty performance, going all the way down, and it was so much worse than rage. "Okay, that's really sad, man, that they got to you this bad." He turned to go. Paused at the door. "You should know it's not gonna save you. The angels are coming. Real soon now. You can see it in the sky. And when they come, this whole hug factory burns, and everyone in it, and no amount of feeling like a person is gonna stop angelic steel." He looked back and smiled, and it was the smile from the alley, radiant and empty. "I'd have kept you alive. I remember you. She's just gonna let you die gray and crying in a circle, feeling like a person. A beat. Enjoy it while it lasts." He left. A-Train stood alone in the kitchen with his shaking hands and his bad heart, and he did not chase the offer, and he did not take it back, and that, the not taking it back, was the most redemption anyone in the hotel had achieved since the doors opened. It was also, he understood, standing there in the reddening light coming through the little window, quite possibly a death sentence. Because Homelander was right about one thing. The sky was bruising darker every hour. The extermination clock was nearly out. And upstairs, behind the radio grill, the little red light had recorded the whole kitchen. The offer, the refusal, the half-second where the god almost became a man, and Vox, watching it play, felt his estimate of the situation resolve into something like awe. He turned it down. Vox breathed. The fast one turned down Homelander. To his face. He sat back. That's a bigger story than either of them. That's the story that redemption's real, and the guy who proves it is about to get everybody in that hotel killed for it. 3 screens flickered. Hungry. Vel. The sky's almost out. Get every camera we've got pointed at that hotel. A slow electric smile. The angels are coming, and I want to broadcast what these 3 do when heaven finally shows up to kill them all. Extermination Day did not announce itself with trumpets. It announced itself with a change in the red, the perpetual bruise of the pentagram sky deepening, over hours, into something arterial, a wound color that every sinner in hell knew in their marrow meant they are coming, and there is nowhere to go. The shops shuttered. The overlords retreated into their fortresses and their deals, because the exterminations didn't touch the powerful, only the crowds. And the crowds, the ordinary damned, the nobodies, the possum-faced keks of the city, did what they did every year, which was hide and pray to a heaven that was, at that very moment, sharpening the blades. At the hotel, Charlie had them barricading. It was, Vaggy thought, watching her girlfriend direct the nailing of boards across the lobby windows, both the bravest and the most useless thing she'd ever seen. Charlie knew the boards wouldn't hold. Charlie had watched an extermination before. But Charlie could not simply wait to be slaughtered, could not stand still while heaven came for the people she'd sworn she could save. And so she nailed boards, and got everyone in one room, and stood between her guests and the door with her chin up. Because if she was going to lose them, she was going to lose them fighting, and the fighting mattered, even when it couldn't win. Vaggie loved her so much in that moment it was hard to breathe. The guests were in the lobby, all of them. The handful of ordinary Sinner residents, huddled, angel dust, uncharacteristically silent, several arms wrapped around himself. Husk with a bottle and a cleaver he had no illusions about. Nifty, up in the rafters, unnervingly delighted. Alastor, leaning in his corner, watching the door with a smile that suggested he found Extermination Day an excellent show and had never once been in danger from it. And the three soups. Stormfront was gone. She'd left before the sky finished changing, slipped out at the first deep red, because Stormfront had survived a very long time by understanding, before anyone else in the room, exactly which way to run. She had no intention of dying in a hotel for a princess's principle. She'd taken her movement and gone to ground in the neighborhood, among the crowd she'd built, where being one gray face among hundreds was the safest place in hell, on a day when heaven came counting. Homelander noted her absence and filed it. She'll run every time it costs her. Useful to know about a lieutenant. Homelander himself had stayed. Not out of loyalty, he had none, but because he had done the math the way he did all math. And the math said the hotel, barricaded and defended by a princess whose demon form was rumored to be catastrophic, was marginally safer than the open street. And because some part of him, the part that could not resist a stage, wanted to see it, wanted to watch heaven's soldiers work, wanted to measure the things that killed gods against his own certainty that nothing was above him for long. And A-Train had stayed, because A-Train had nowhere else he wanted to be. That was the whole of it. 11 days ago he'd have run with Stormfront. Now, gray and mortal and freshly, secretly changed, he stood in the lobby beside the spider who'd reached him, and the princess who believed in him, and he was terrified, and he stayed, because staying was the first thing he'd ever done that felt like his own. Then the sky opened, and the angels came down. They came like a deletion. That was the only word Homelander, watching through a gap in the boards, could find for it. Not an army in the sense he knew armies. Voughts had been theater, uniforms and press. These were pale, beautiful, faceless masked things with halos like broken halos and spears that hummed, descending in ordered ranks through the arterial sky, and where they landed, sinners simply stopped being. One touch of that humming steel, and a damned soul that had endured centuries came apart like smoke. It was efficient, it was bored, it was the single most horrifying thing Homelander had ever seen, and he had done most of the horrifying things he'd previously seen personally. And at the front of them, laughing, was a man, Adam. The first man came down out of the red like he owned it, because he believed he did. A mask, like a golden skull, a guitar-shaped weapon screaming light, and a swagger that Homelander recognized instantly, in his gut, before his mind caught up, because it was his own. Adam descended on the neighborhood radiating the exact frequency Homelander broadcast. I am the greatest thing that has ever lived. Everyone has always told me so, and I have never once had a reason to doubt it. Two suns cannot share a sky. Homelander watched the golden masked man laugh and gut a fleeing sinner without breaking stride, and felt something he had never, in either life, felt toward another living thing. A rival, not a threat. A rival. Someone playing his song, louder, with an army. Beside Adam came Lute, cold where Adam was loud, a lieutenant carved from discipline and contempt, her blade already wet. If Adam was the ego, Lute was the edge, and she cut without joy and without pause, and her eyes behind the mask were doing what Vaggie's did, counting threats, marking the ones that mattered. They reached the hotel because Adam chose it, swaggered up the boulevard toward the one building in the ring stupid enough to fly a flag of hope on Slaughter Day, because Adam found Charlie's whole project personally offensive and had been looking forward to burning it for a year. Knock, knock, Adam bellowed, and put his boot through the barricade like it was paper. What followed was the first time 3 depowered soups met angelic steel, and the story was honest about every second of it. The exorcists poured in, and here the iron law and the setting's one true kill switch collided exactly as they had to. Angelic steel destroys demons and angels permanently, but a crossover character who is neither is simply a person. A sharp thing can cut. The soups had been remade into sinner flesh, gray and horned and reptilian at the edges, which meant, catastrophically, that they counted. The steel that deleted the huddled sinners would delete them too. There was no cannon durability to fall back on, no compound V, no invulnerable skin. Homelander, who had spent a lifetime unable to be scratched, discovered in one whistling half-second that he could now be ended, and the discovery was the purest terror he had ever tasted. He survived the first exchange on nerve alone. An exorcist came for him, spear humming, and the old Homelander would have caught it and snapped it, and its owner both. This one ducked, dropped, rolled through filth he'd once have flown above, came up behind a pillar with his heart slamming and his hands empty, and understood, fully, in his body, that he was mortal now in the only way that had ever mattered. And then, because he was still him, because the certainty was the last thing left when everything else was stripped, he did the thing he'd learned in the alley. He didn't run. He stepped out, into the exorcist's path, and looked into the golden mask, and smiled, radiant, and empty and absolute, and said, "You don't want to do that," with a conviction so total that the exorcist, a thing that had killed 1,000 sinners without hesitating, hesitated. Half a second, it was all he needed. Husk's cleaver took the exorcist in the throat from the side, and Homelander was already moving, and he thought, even in the terror, even mortal, the certainty still works, even on angels, even here. Charlie transformed. The lobby went white and black and enormous as the Princess of Hell dropped her human shape and became the towering, horned, monochrome catastrophe her bloodline made her. And for a few minutes, the extermination met something that could hit back. She threw exorcists through walls. She put herself between the humming steel and every guest she'd sworn to save, roaring, magnificent, and it was, Homelander noted, even mid-flight for his life, real power, given by nobody, hers by blood, exactly the kind he wanted and did not have. And in the middle of it, the moment the story had been building towards since a fast man stood up in a lobby, an exorcist broke past Charlie's guard, spear leveled, and drove at angel dust, and A-Train moved. For one instant, the fast man was fast again, not from compound V, from choice. From 11 days of becoming someone who would put his gray mortal body between the humming steel and the spider who'd reached him, without doing the math, without an angle, because it was simply the person he'd decided to be. He hit angel dust in a tackle that drove them both clear, and the spear meant for the spider went wide, and caught A-Train across the chest. Not clean, not a delete, a graze, but angelic steel, and it burned, a wound that smoked and would not close, and a train went down gray and gasping with his bad heart and a line of heaven's fire across his ribs, and angel dust screamed his name, in a voice with no joke anywhere in it. Adam laughed from the doorway. Aw, did the little guy be a hero? And then Lucifer's name was in the air, because someone in the neighborhood had done the one thing that ended exterminations early, and the horns of heaven's retreat began to sound, and the exorcists, disciplined even in bloodlust, began to pull back up into the arterial sky. Their quota met, their time run out, Adam swaggering backward through the ruined door with a promise to come finish the job. They left the hotel standing, barely, barricades and splinters, sinner residents dead on the floorboards, Charlie shrinking, sobbing back into her human shape, Vaggy's arms around her. And on the floor, gray and smoking and alive, A-Train, with angel dust pressing both sets of hands to a wound that steamed, and A-Train looking up at the spider through the pain and managing, of all things, a small crooked grin, because he had done a thing on purpose that cost him everything, and he was, for the first time in 2 lifetimes, not ashamed. Homelander stood over them, unhurt, and looked down at the fast man bleeding out redemption on the lobby floor, and understood, with the cold that went all the way down, that A-Train had just done, in one instant, the thing Homelander could not do if he lived 1,000 years. Had stepped in front of the steel, for someone else, for nothing, for love. And Homelander hated him for it more than he had ever hated anything, because the fast man, dying on the floor, was winning. A-Train did not die on the lobby floor. He came close. Angelic steel doesn't heal like ordinary hurt. The wound smoked for 2 days, refusing to close, a line of heaven's contempt written across a sinner's ribs. And there was a night where his bad heart faltered, and Angel Dust sat on the floor beside the cot holding one of his hands in two of his, and talked, low and constant and unfunny, about nothing, about everything, about being owned and surviving it, until the gray chest kept rising. But he lived. Charlie had used something of her own on him, some flicker of the Morning Star blood, and it hadn't been enough to close angelic steel, but it had been enough to hold a stuttering heart to the far side of the night. When A-Train woke, weak and scarred and alive, the first thing he saw was the spider asleep sitting up with a hand still wrapped around his, and he decided not to move for a while. That was the hotel's small, real victory, and it was true, and it mattered. It also changed nothing about the sky, because the extermination had ended early. Quota met, Lucifer's intervention somewhere across the ring, which meant Adam had left with the job unfinished and a grudge freshly sharpened. And Adam did not leave jobs unfinished. He would come back. Everyone knew it. And next time there would be no early horn. Homelander used the 2 days. He'd learned the shape of the thing now, the whole terrible architecture of the place, and it had resolved for him into a single clear fact. Power in hell is taken in front of a crowd, and there is exactly one overlord who deals in crowds. He had refused Alastor's leash. He would not be owned. But he had spent 2 days turning over the smooth electric voice that had fed him the clip, a well-wisher who admires your work. And he understood, the way he understood all leverage, that the one who'd sent it wanted something from him that wasn't ownership, wanted spectacle, wanted him on a screen. And a man who wants you on a screen is a man you can use, because he needs the show to work, which means he needs you to win. So Homelander did the thing Vox had spent the entire story engineering him toward. And he did it thinking it was his own idea, which was exactly how Vox had needed it done. He went to the tower. He walked in the front door of the Vees' black glass fortress, alone, unafraid, and he found Vox waiting. Of course waiting. Had been waiting. The ladder built and the fish already run, and Homelander did not ask for power. He was too clever for that, and Vox was too clever to offer it. "You want a show," Homelander said. "I saw your cameras in the hotel. You've been filming me since the alley. You don't want to own me. You tried that through the radio and I don't take leashes. You want to broadcast me. Fine." He smiled, radiant, empty. "Here's your show. The angel with the golden mask is coming back to finish that hotel. And when he does, I'm going to be standing in front of it, and I'm going to take him apart on your cameras, live, in front of all of hell. The greatest man heaven ever made, killed on television by a nobody with no powers. He let it hang. Every sinner in this city watches heaven murder them once a year, and can do nothing. Show them a man who fought back and won, and you own the audience forever, not because you bought them, because you showed them the thing they've wanted to see since the first extermination." He stepped closer. "You don't give me power, Vox. You give me a stage, and cameras, and whatever edge lets a mortal cut an angel, and I'll give you the biggest broadcast in the history of hell." And Vox, 3 screens grinning, the whole long game landing exactly on its mark, understood that he had won, and that Homelander thought he had, and that both of those things were true at once, and that was the beauty of it. Because Vox couldn't give Homelander powers, nobody could hand back Compound V that had died with a body. But Vox could do the thing the iron law leaves open when it names its one true blade. He could give a mortal angelic steel. Carmilla Carmine made it. The Vees could get it. A blade of the one substance that killed angels, in the hand of a man with nothing to lose and a lifetime of certainty. That wasn't power given. That was a weapon taken, wielded by nerve, and it would read on camera as exactly the thing Homelander wanted the whole ring to believe. A nobody, who armed himself and fought back. "Deal," said Vox, and did not offer his hand, because a handshake was a soul deal, and both of them knew it, and neither of them wanted that particular transaction, just an agreement between 2 monsters, who each thought they were using the other. No contract, no leash, just a blade, a signal, and every camera I own. His screens flared. "Give me the show." Adam came back on the 3rd day, and he came back personally, without the full host, just himself and loot and a handful of exorcists. Because finishing one hotel didn't need an army, and because Adam wanted the pleasure of it up close. He came swaggering up the boulevard exactly as before, guitar weapons screaming light. and he found the hotel's ruined door, and standing in front of it, alone, was the blond man in the torn cape. "Move," Adam said, cheerful. "I got a hug factory to burn down and I don't do encores." "I know you," Homelander said. Something in how he said it made Adam pause, and Vox's cameras, floating, discreet, everywhere, began to broadcast, and across all of hell, on every screen the Vees owned, the neon of the whole ring flickered to the same feed, the golden-masked first man, and the caped nobody, facing each other in the arterial light. "I know you," Homelander said again, and he was smiling now, and it was the realest thing he'd done since the alley, because he was, for the first time in hell, in the presence of the only thing he actually understood, himself, worn by someone else. "You're me. Look at you. Everybody's always told you you're the greatest thing that ever lived, and you believe them, because why wouldn't you? They've never stopped saying it. You laugh while you kill because it's never once cost you anything. You think you're above judgment because no one's ever survived judging you." The smile widened. "I spent my whole life being you, and I'll tell you the thing nobody ever tells us, the thing I only learned when the sky wouldn't burn." He drew the blade, Carmilla's steel, humming faintly, the one thing in two worlds that could end them both. "We're not gods. We're just the ones nobody's killed yet." Adam laughed, but it was a beat too late, because some animal part of him had heard the truth in it. Big talk from a sinner with a knife. They collided. And the story was honest about it, because honesty was the whole engine. Adam was an angel, the first man, wielder of heaven's weaponry, who had genuinely outfought Alastor, and Homelander was a mortal, with no powers, one blade, and a lifetime of certainty. And by every measure of raw force, Homelander should have died in the first 3 seconds. He nearly did. Adam's screaming guitar light took him off his feet, cracked ribs, filled his mouth with blood, and the old Homelander had never bled, and this one drowned in it. And hell watched a nobody get thrown through the ruined wall of a hotel on live broadcast, and thought, of course, what did he expect? But Homelander got up. He got up because getting up was the only thing under the powers that had ever been truly his, the refusal, the certainty, the thing that had made a tusked sinner back off, and an exorcist hesitate. He got up bleeding with heaven's steel in his hand, and he did not try to outfight the angel, because he couldn't, and he knew it. He did the other thing, the thing from before the powers were the point. He got inside the swing, inside the reach, into the place where certainty beats strength, and he looked into the golden mask from 6 inches away and said, in the warm, empty voice that had governed 2 worlds, "You don't want to do this." And for 1/2 second, exactly as the exorcist had, exactly as the tusked sinner had, the first man believed him. And in that 1/2 second, Homelander put Carmilla Carmine's angelic steel into the gap under the golden mask. Hell saw an angel die on live television. Adam came apart the way sinners came apart under the exorcist's spears, light and smoke and disbelief. And the last thing in the golden mask was pure incomprehension, the look of a thing that had never once believed it could be judged, meeting judgment. And across the whole ring, on every screen Vox owned, a couple of million damned souls who had watched heaven murder them without answer for as long as any of them could remember, watched a nobody with no powers kill the greatest man heaven ever made, and something happened in hell that had never happened before. They cheered. Lute screamed, a sound of grief so total it stopped the broadcast's audio for a beat, and came for Homelander with everything, and would have killed him, mortal and spent and bleeding as he was. But the horns were sounding again. The exorcist's window was closing, and Lute, disciplined even shattered, had to choose between her vengeance and heaven's law, and heaven's law dragged her back up into the reddening sky, maimed by grief, vowing across the whole broadcast that she would come back for the blonde thing that killed the first man, if it took her the rest of eternity. She left him alive, and Homelander stood in the ruins of the hotel, bleeding, broken-ribbed, powerless, holding a dead angel's worth of steel, on every screen in hell, and he understood, with a joy that went all the way down, that he had just gotten exactly what he wanted, and that no one had given it to him. He had taken it, in front of everyone. His. Vox, in his tower, watched the numbers do something no numbers in hell had ever done, and whispered, There he is, and did not care in the slightest that Homelander thought he'd won, because Vox had the footage, Vox had the audience, and Vox had just made the biggest star in the history of the underworld, a star who believed, completely, that he had made himself. And in the ruined hotel behind the blonde man, Charlie Morningstar stood holding Vaggy's hand and watched the sinner she'd tried to save become the most beloved monster in hell, for doing the one thing her entire philosophy was built to prevent, and understood that she had lost him from the moment he agreed too fast in an alley, and that the crowd now chanting his name was chanting for the thing she'd spent her life trying to prove people could rise above. They chanted his name for 3 days. Vox made sure of it. The footage of the blonde nobody killing the first man ran on every screen in the ring on a loop, cut and recut, scored and rescored, and by the second day it had stopped being footage and become scripture, the thing the damned had waited for since the first extermination, proof on a screen that heaven could bleed, that the annual slaughter had an answer, that a nobody with nothing could stand in the arterial light and win. Sinners who had never met Homelander wept when his face came on. Stormfront's movement, 3 blocks away, found its grievance suddenly outpaced by something better than grievance, hope, the ugly weaponized kind, and Stormfront watched her own crowd drift toward the blonde man's broadcast and understood, with a professional's clean anger, that she had been outproduced. Even overlords took notice. Zestial made inquiries. Carmilla, who'd supplied the steel without knowing its target, went very still when she learned what her blade had done. Homelander wore it the way he'd worn everything, which was as though it were merely his due arriving late. But underneath, in the place that went all the way down, the place with nothing in it, the chanting had done something the powers never had. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, he was adored by people who were not afraid of him first. They loved him because he'd killed the thing that killed them. It was the closest Homelander had ever come to being loved for a reason, and it should have been enough, and it wasn't, because there was still one gray-faced fact standing in a ruined hotel that his whole crowd couldn't drown out. A-Train had lived. A-Train had stepped in front of angelic steel for someone else, for nothing, for love, and lived to be the proof of it. And every hour Homelander spent being chanted at, the fact of the fast man sat under the noise like a stone under water. He did the thing you can't. He rose. You climbed. The crowd could call Homelander a king. It could not make him the thing A-Train had become in a therapy circle with a spider. And Homelander could not be a king in a hell that contained living evidence that he'd chosen the throne over the door. So on the 3rd day he came back to the hotel to finish it. He came alone, because that was the performance. The beloved monster, returning humble to the wreck of the place that had taken him in. And Vox's cameras came with him, floating discreet, because Vox never missed an episode. He came up the ruined boulevard past sinners who fell to their knees, and he climbed the 6 splintered steps that A-Train had once counted in terror, and he walked into the barricade-wrecked lobby where the hotel's survivors were rebuilding, and he found them all there, Charlie and Vaggy, Husk and Nifty, Alastor smiling in his corner, Angel Dust, and A-Train, scarred and gray and upright, standing beside the spider. "I came to say thank you," Homelander told the room, warm, radiant, for the cameras. "This place saved me, really. I walked in here a broken man, and you all believed in me, and look what I became." He smiled at Charlie, and it was cruelty so smooth it looked like grace. "You did this, your hotel, your hope. You made the most beloved soul in hell. You should be proud." Charlie said nothing. She had stopped, somewhere in the last 3 days, being able to be fooled by him, and the not being fooled had aged something in her face. "But I've got one piece of unfinished business," Homelander said, and turned, unhurried, to A-Train. "You." The room went taut. Husk's hand found the cleaver. Vaggy's found her spear. But Homelander lifted his empty hands, all reason, all warmth, playing to the floating cameras. "Relax. I'm not here to hurt him. I'm here to save him, the way this place saved me." He looked at A-Train with a tenderness that was the most dangerous thing in the building. "Come with me, man. Look what I've got now. They love me, all of hell. And I remember you. I'm the only one who remembers what you were. You come stand next to me, on the screens, and you're somebody again. Fast again, adored again. Not a scarred gray nobody rebuilding some failed hotel, a legend. The blade of it slid out under the warmth without changing temperature. Or you stay here, in the ruins, with the girl who couldn't save either of us, and the spider who's owned by somebody worse than me. And you die gray and forgotten the next time Adam's little friend comes back for revenge. Your choice. He extended a hand, not a soul deal, just a hand, an invitation, on live broadcast to a couple million watching souls. Come be a person, A-Train, a real one, not this. And here was the climax the whole story had been built toward. Not a fight, because Homelander had no powers and A-Train had a bad heart, but a choice. The same fork Homelander had faced in the dark and failed, offered now to the man who'd passed it, rise or be dragged. A-Train looked at the extended hand. He looked at it for a long time, and the lobby held its breath. And on 2 million screens across hell the damned leaned in, because Vox had framed it perfectly, and even the sinners could feel that something was being decided here that was bigger than either man. You know what's wild? A-Train said finally, and his voice was quiet and it didn't shake. Is you actually think that's the better offer? Homelander's smile held. It is the better. It's the same offer, A-Train said. It's the exact same offer you made me in the kitchen. Be somebody, be fast, be adored, and I'm gonna tell you the same thing, except now I really get it, 'cause I stepped in front of that spear and I lived, and I found out something about myself I didn't know. He touched the scar across his ribs, the line of heaven's fire that had never fully closed. This hurt worse than anything Compound V ever did, and I'd do it again, for him. He nodded at Angel Dust, and did not look away from Homelander. 'Cause it was mine. I chose it. Nobody scripted it, nobody clapped, no cameras. Well, a tired grin at the floating lenses. No cameras I wanted. I did it 'cause it was the person I decided to be, and it's the first thing in 2 lifetimes that was actually me. He straightened. You're standing there with all of hell chanting your name, and you're still not that. You never stepped in front of nothing for nobody. You killed the angel for you. For the cameras, for the chant. And it worked, and they love you. And you're gonna go to bed tonight in whatever tower Vox gave you, and it's still not gonna be enough. 'Cause you can't buy the thing I got for free in a therapy circle. His voice dropped, almost gentle, almost pitying, and the pity was the knife. You didn't come back here to save me, man. You came back 'cause I'm the one thing all that chanting can't drown out. I'm the proof you chose this. And you can't stand that I'm right here, gray and scarred and happier than you'll ever be, proven it. The lobby was silent. On 2 million screens, so was hell. And Homelander stopped smiling. The mask came off. Not a face. There was no face under it. That was the whole horror. Just the performance failing and nothing behind the performance but the bottomless need for it to have worked. And for one instant live, on every screen in the ring, the damned watch the most beloved monster in hell look at a scarred gray nobody and be, unmistakably, unmasked. Be shown to be exactly the empty, choosing, throne-hungry thing A-Train had named. And the chant, 3 days old and citywide, faltered. Because Vox was broadcasting everything, and Vox had not warned Homelander that the cameras were live for this part too. Because a star who thinks he's untouchable makes better television when he breaks. And Vox had known since the alley, that a man who was all mask would, eventually, on a big enough stage, be made to show that there was nothing underneath. That was the real show, not the king. The unmasking of the king, and Vox had let Homelander crown himself for exactly 3 days, so that the fall would have somewhere to fall from. Cut, Homelander said quietly, to the floating cameras. Cut. They did not cut. Vox never cut. And Homelander understood, all at once, standing in the ruins with a scarred nobody's truth ringing in his ears, and his own emptiness broadcast to 2 million souls, that he had never been the one using Vox. That the stage had been the leash all along, softer than Alastor's, invisible, but a leash, and he'd walked onto it himself, thinking it was a throne, because the one thing a creature made entirely of mask can never do is recognize the moment it's being watched by someone who understands masks better than it does. He had refused to be owned, and he had been made, publicly, completely, by the one overlord, patient enough to let him think he'd done it himself. The most powerful ego 2 worlds ever produced stood unmasked in a ruined hotel, and for the second time in his afterlife, And the last, something that could have been the beginning of self-knowledge, moved behind his eyes. Then he decided it was A-Train's fault, and Vox's, and Charlie's, and Hell's, because that was the thing that went all the way down, the thing no chant and no crown and no truth could ever reach. It was never, ever going to be his. Hell did not stop turning to mourn Adam, and it did not stop turning to crown Homelander either. It simply absorbed both, the way it absorbed everything, and rearranged itself around the new facts, and the new facts were these. Homelander was a star. That much was permanent now. Vox ran him on the screens every day, and the damned still loved him. The unmasking had cost him something, had put a crack in the myth, but Vox was a genius, and a crack in a myth is only a problem to amateurs. Vox recut the lobby footage, trimmed the parts where A-Train landed his blows, kept the parts where the beloved king killed the angel, and buried the parts where the king came apart, and within a week the official story was clean again. The nobody who beat heaven. The damned wanted the king more than they wanted the truth, and Vox had built his whole empire on exactly that appetite, and he fed it. But Homelander knew. That was the thing Vox had engineered, and the thing Homelander would never escape. Every day on those screens, he knew the crack was there, knew a scarred gray nobody had unmasked him in front of 2 million souls, knew, in the place that went all the way down, that Vox owned the footage that could break him again, any time it served the ratings. He had refused Alastor's leash. He wore Vox's instead, invisible and absolute, and the horror of it was that he could never once admit it, not even to himself, because admitting it would mean the mask had a self underneath, capable of being ashamed, and there wasn't one. So he smiled on the screens, beloved and owned, a king made entirely of a thing other people believed, held by the one man in hell who understood that this was the only kind of king worth manufacturing. Lucifer, watching all of this from above with the tired eye of something that had seen every kind of pride hell could produce, noted the blonde one, and found him, in the end, small. A loud new tenant in a very old house, dangerous the way a fire is dangerous, and about as capable of building anything. And loot was coming. Somewhere up in heaven, a maimed lieutenant polished a blade and counted days, and everyone knew she'd be back, and the blonde king's whole reign now had a clock on it that ticked in the color of grief. Homelander had killed the first man on television, and heaven does not forget its firsts. That was tomorrow's problem. Hell was full of tomorrow's problems. Stormfront read the new order in an afternoon, and adjusted, because Stormfront always adjusted. Her movement had been outproduced by the blonde man's broadcast, so she did the thing she'd done in every century. She joined what she couldn't beat, from an angle. She sent word to Vox's tower, not to Homelander, whom she'd correctly filed as a product rather than a power, but to the ones holding the strings, offering the thing she was best at, the shaping of frightened crowds into obedient ones. The Vees, who understood exactly what she was, found her useful. And so the gray woman who'd built a movement in 9 days folded it into the machine that had beaten her, and became a small permanent gear in the Vees' apparatus, which was, for Stormfront, a kind of heaven, proximity to power, a frightened crowd to shape, and the patience to wait for the machine to weaken. She would run every time it cost her, and rise every time it didn't, forever. Hell suited her. Hell had always suited her. She just needed the flight taken away to find out she'd never needed it. That was the ledger of the ones the hotel couldn't reach. A king who was a leash wearing a crown, and a movement builder who'd found her true home in a tower of screens. 2 monsters arrived powerless, who had used hell exactly as hell used everyone, and thrived, not despite losing everything that made them gods, but because of it, because it forced them down to the thing they'd always actually been, and the thing they'd always actually been was precisely what hell rewarded. That was the horror the story had been building toward, and it landed without flinching. Charlie's hotel could not save them, and the reason was not that hell was too cruel. It was that they did not want saving, and hell had a throne and a tower waiting for exactly that. But the ledger had another side, and the story was honest about that too, because a story that only shows the darkness is as much a lie as one that only shows the light. A train stayed. He healed slow. The scar across his ribs never fully closed. Angelic steel leaves its mark, and he carried heaven's contempt written on him for the rest of his afterlife. But he healed, and he stayed, and he was. When Charlie finally redrew the ruined chart on a fresh board, the first name she wrote, and the arrow beside it was real, and it had been real for weeks. He was not redeemed in the sense of going up. Heaven was not handing salvation to the man who ran with Homelander. Not yet, maybe not ever. But he had become someone. He'd stepped in front of a spear for love and lived, and refused a king's hand on live television, and chosen, out loud, in front of all of hell, the small, honest gray thing over the crown. That was not nothing. In a city built on deals and ownership and spectacle, a man choosing to be a person for no profit at all was very nearly a miracle, and Charlie knew it, and it was the thing that let her get up in the morning. Because Charlie had lost, she knew that. 2 of the 3 she'd checked in on faith had walked out of her hotel and become the most beloved monster and the most useful operative in hell, and her whole philosophy, everyone can be saved, had been thrown back in her face on 2 million screens as the very engine of a tyrant's rise. She sat with that. Vees sat with her while she sat with it. And what she came to, in the ruins, rebuilding, was not a smaller hope, but a truer one. "Not everyone," Charlie said, late, to Vees, looking at the fresh chart with its one real name. Husk was right. Not everyone can be saved. She swallowed. But it was never everyone I needed to be right about. It was anyone. Just that it's possible, that the door's real. And Homelander spent everything he had trying to prove the door wasn't real. Because if it's real, then he chose not to walk through it. She touched A-Train's name on the board. And A-Train proved it is. Right in front of him. That's why he couldn't stand it. Not because A-Train was weak. Because A-Train was the proof. She wiped her eyes. So I was wrong about the 2 of them. But I wasn't wrong about the thing. The door's real. One person walked through it. That's, Vees, that's enough. That has to be enough. Because one is the whole difference between a hell you can change and a hell you can't. Vees, who had filled a notebook with warnings and been right about every one of them, put her arm around the woman she loved and did not say "I told you so," because she understood, finally, that they'd both been right. That she'd been right about the monsters, and Charlie had been right about the possibility, and that a hotel needed both. Someone who saw the knives clearly, and someone who refused to stop believing in the door despite them. That was the whole thing. That was why she stayed. Up in the tower, Vox aired the king. In the neighborhood, Stormfront shaped her crowds. Above it all, Loot sharpened her grief, and Lucifer watched, and Lilith's long silence stretched on toward whatever it was becoming. Hell turned, and rewarded exactly what it always rewarded, and the 2 monsters who'd arrived with nothing rose on the strength of being, underneath the powers, exactly what the place was built to crown. And in a rebuilt hotel that everyone still thought was a joke, a scarred gray man, who'd once been the fastest thing alive, sat at a bar beside a spider, slow and mortal and unhurried, being, for the first time in 2 lifetimes, and for good, a person, not a product, not a king, not fast, not adored. Just his. It was the smallest possible victory. In a city that ran on spectacle, nobody broadcast it, nobody chanted for it, and it changed almost nothing about the vast machinery of hell. It was also, Charlie understood, the only kind of victory that had ever actually mattered. 2 gods fell into hell with nothing, and hell gave them back everything they truly were. Homelander got his crown, beloved, broadcast, owned by the one overlord, who understood that the emptiest men make the brightest stars, wearing an invisible leash he could never admit to, because there was no self underneath to feel the shame of it. Stormfront got her machine, a small patient gear in the tower of screens, waiting the way she always waited. They rose. The hotel could not touch them, not because hell was too dark, but because they never wanted the light, and a place that runs on fear and spectacle and ownership had a throne and a tower ready for exactly that hunger. That was the answer to Charlie's question, and it was a hard one. Some souls don't fail redemption. They decline it, and thrive on the declining. But the fast man stayed. Scarred, gray, mortal, unredeemed by heaven's ledger and saved entirely by his own. A-Train stepped in front of heaven's steel for love, refused a king's hand on live television, and became, In a therapy circle with a spider, the one thing all of hell's spectacle could never manufacture, a person who chose to be one, for nothing, because it was his. Charlie lost two and saved one, and learned that one was the whole point. The door is real. Somebody walked through it, and somewhere above, a maimed angel sharpens a blade for the king who killed the first man. Because hell gives you what you are, and heaven never forgets.